Okay, thank you all. We got a really, this is a special one. This is actually one of my favorite ones, I think, coming up. So everyone's really should be excited about this. And I'm going to introduce our moderator is Eric Goldberg, who's going to introduce these amazing people on stage. Eric?
Thank you, Tommy. In any event, for years, the games industry has been used to supplicating to the venture industry to try and invest in games, and usually with people who, and almost always with people who have no operating experience with games. This panel, however, is your tribe has come home. Every one of the investors over here has between 15 and 30 years of experience in the games field. So there may be lies that you're not able to tell them and have them pretend to believe. So on your far left and my far right, which is not representative of his politics, is Charles Hudson, who is the managing partner of Precursor Ventures. He comes out of the field through Gaia and Serious Business, which became part of Zynga. His some representative investments include DriveTime, Triba XR, and a stealth company in blockchain gaming, and actually several other stealth companies which you can do. So Charles runs a generalist fund. He invests not just in games, but in a broad set of categories. Next to him is Ed Fries, who just recently announced One Up Ventures. I believe you've closed the fund with it since GDC.
Closed my first LP.
Yes. Anyway, he also started a small little division of Microsoft called Microsoft Games, and he oversaw the development of the Xbox, which our host Dean Takahashi has written up at book length for those of you who want to get copies. And will you be available to sign copies if they rush out and buy?
Not going to happen.
Okay. He is doing a fund that is targeted at game developers, and he has been the most active advisor to game companies with over 50 over the last 15 years. And next to me is David Gardner, who is the general partner of London Venture Partners. I should say that while the name London Venture Partners may suggest that he has a limited geography, he and his partners have 6 investments on the West Coast. So he's perfectly comfortable investing in you guys too. His background includes being one of the first 12 employees of EA, and he basically built out their international division. He has been an investor both as a seed investor and as a partner at Unity, Supercell, Playfish, and Natural Motion. And London Venture Partners is willing to invest across the entire games spectrum, but they are a games specialist. So at yesterday's institutional Series A and Series B fund, I asked the question, why is this going to be different from 2011 to 2012, where the VC community got excited about games, poured way too much money into it, and it all ended up in a hangover, as the venture industry often does. And aside from the polite lies that VCs sometimes tell, they did point out that one of the key differences is that there's a layer of seed game investors, and that will make this one difference. There are people who actually have to understand your business in a way that didn't last time. There are at least 9 seed venture funds investing in either specializing in games or investing in games in the US. To give you an idea, as of 3 years ago, there was 1. So this is a fairly significant change. What I'd like to do is start by asking the panelists, so what is it that is going to make this time different? How are they going to be able to ensure that game companies do not get swept in another wave of money going into it from both the strategics and venture investors? David, you started your fund in the wake of the hangover, so you observed most directly the damage. How are we avoiding it this time?
What year was the hangover?
Well, after 2012.
Because I was sort of realizing as you were saying that, I remember actually going around trying to raise money, which is part of what motivated me to get into starting a fund focused on games. You would ask a VC, I really want you to consider investing in this game startup. Oh, no, we don't like investing in games companies. And you'd say, well, why is that? It's a hits-driven business. We don't like it. I said, but that's the venture capital model.
Right. Isn't that what you do?
That's the whole point. Yep. And I realized that their filter was just that, they felt they could pick the potential winning general companies, but when they saw games, it was very confusing. And because games aren't usually solving a problem anyways, it's entertainment, right? You guys know that. So some things are solving a problem. Things like Unity might be solving problems, but fundamentally a game is an entertainment vehicle. So I think they missed out because we were very pleased to be part of Supercell, which was $5 billion on its first transaction, $10 billion on its second transaction. We weren't part of the second. Microsoft bought Mojang with Minecraft. King went public for whatever they went public at, $5 or $6 billion. So there were so many unicorns in that period, and so I think the hangover was a misforecast.
How many MMO platforms really took off? That's because that's where they put all their money.
Yeah, that's true. There were the gazillions and et cetera, et cetera. So what's going to be different? I mean, I think maybe they'll just have another name for it. But the games industry, because it's continuing to go through fantastic growth, we have more geographies, more demographics, more and more technology delivering more fun experiences. I'm not particularly worried about it. Can you make the wrong choices, invest in companies that go bust? Absolutely, you can make all those classic mistakes. But I don't think it's like the economy, which has these kind of boom and bust cycles. Games, as far as I can remember, actually hasn't yet had a bust. It's had more people playing more games and more hours of games than ever before. It just has platform shifts inside that fantastic growth.
Yes, but for venture backing a company, what is it that you're going to try and do? I mean, I understand that you're not going to overinvest in MMO platforms, or at least that's Ed's position. But what is it? What lessons are you going to take in targeting the venture-backed companies, not game companies in general, but the ones that you're going to back?
Well, I would say specifically to that, finding companies that are fundable. So not just by us, we'll make a funding decision, but depending on what they're trying to build and how much money they need over their lifespan before they're cash positive, they have to have a funding strategy. And it's no good if only games people want to invest in them. They're going to have to be able to be commercially investable. So I think that's where this intersection comes with other funding sources like classic Sand Hill Road style VCs. They have to be able to believe in that. And I think our job, we haven't yet talked about it, but I think our job as kind of specialty investors is to prep and help those companies be credible. I want all of us to be a successful firm because that's a rising tide. That means that the games industry is credible to the wider financial market, and that's a goal.
I think part of what happened, I think part of what happened is you had a lot of people who came into investing in games and all they wanted to talk about was payback periods and acquisition. And they looked at games companies the way you would look at an e-commerce company, and it was all about the math on spend versus return, and there was no appreciation for creativity, engagement, fun. It was a math problem. And the math looked really good in the early days of the App Store and Facebook platform for those of us who were building way back then. And it didn't, there were some people who got it right away. And the thinking was, the math here is so good, these businesses can consume infinite amounts of capital in a cash flow positive way. And I think what people learned is that some teams are better at building hit after hit or are better at extending the life cycle of hits. And I don't think a lot of people who poured into games had any appreciation for that if they hadn't been in the industry. And so what they found was, wow, this early investment I made, the payback period is so great, let's give them 10x the money to spend on acquisition. And either when that channel stopped working or the platform shifted or that investor found themselves with a team who didn't have an idea or a long-term plan for what they wanted to build, they were also running this black box machine, kind of ended badly. And you had companies that said, well, our next best alternative is to copy stuff that other people are doing, and you got into that whole death cycle. So I think the good news is I think a lot of investors learned that like the skill, creativity, and team content matters just as much as the unit economics around the game. And that the unit economics are not a hack for picking the best games companies, and you have to back teams that have a long-term vision either for the franchise that they're building or the category that they're in.
So you're implying, Charles, that in effect there's an A&R component over here. VCs do not invest in movies, they do not invest in music, they do not invest in books. and games are the one entertainment medium they do it. Ed, your strategy, in effect, feeds into that. You are set up effectively as an A&R executive, and you bring to the party that you've been involved with at least 50 companies, most of which I assume are studios?
Yeah, I mean, my approach has certainly been dictated by my experience running a publisher. And I actually don't think a publisher's approach is that different than a VC's approach, in the sense that they want to build a broad portfolio of games. They know it's a hit-driven business. They're going to invest in great people, great products. They really know the content well. And they know that just a small number of things are going to produce the majority of their profits. And and you can look at, my own experience running Microsoft's game business for 8 years. I mean, it was really 3 games that mattered. It was Flight Simulator coming in, and then it was Age of Empires, that series, and that's what bridged us to releasing Halo for Xbox. And as an investor, that's what you want. You want a hit-driven business. You don't want just a bunch of businesses that are just going to grow a little bit. You want to be able to invest and have a few do spectacularly well, as you've done with Supercell, for example. So really, the approach, I think, is to build a broad and diverse portfolio, and that's what my strategy is all about.
So, all right, one of the other things that you say, but I think you mean something different. VCs always say we like to invest in, I didn't set that up well. The VCs like to say we invest in people, and you and Charles have both said, and David, of course, agrees by his actions, that you invest in the team. But how much of the mixture is team, how much of it is concept, and how much of it is medium in which you're working?
For me personally, it's all about the team. In fact, I've sat through hundreds of game pitches. I don't really want to sit through too many more.
You chose the wrong business then.
I mean, no, I was having meetings every half hour for 5 days at GDC. I was having a great time, but people would walk in with a pitch, and we'd just push it over to the other edge of the table, and then talk about them and what their experience and their motivation, what they're trying to do. I want to be part of their team for a long time. I want to be. Basically, I'm trying to build a community of game developers that can work together and help each other be successful. And so that's not about the one great idea they have right now. It's about them being successful long term.
Okay, Charles, every one of the investments that you've announced and even not announced are in a new media, are all in a media that's non-traditional for games. Are you taking a different approach than?
Yeah, I'd say half of the teams I've backed are people who have what I would describe as like credible previous experience in games, and the other half are just creative people who have an idea. The thing I like as a generalist about investing in these new platforms is we don't actually know what works. Yeah, that's true. There isn't as much inbuilt advantage because this isn't the nth time that someone's tried to build this mixed reality game that this company's working on, or this blockchain game. These are kind of greenfield areas, and we're smart people. They might turn out to be red oceans, they might not work, but at least there I feel like a new entrant to the space has just as much of a chance of figuring these things out. In mobile games, there's a lot of people who know what works, who have a lot of insights, relationships, and as a generalist, it's harder for me to find and get access to the teams that are in the well-established zones of games that I think are looking for the kind of capital we provide, which is $1 million or less. Like, these are small rounds. And these new platforms, usually acquisition is cheaper, it's less well understood, the categories are less crowded, and oftentimes if you have one or two really good insights, you can build a franchise or a brand that's interesting. So I tend to look for areas where I think games ought to exist but don't yet exist, and where people come to me with ideas about interesting products and concepts.
Okay, David, Ed and Charles represent opposite ends of the spectrum. You've covered both of them. Can you give a sense of where you're...
Turn it into a fight. I don't disagree with it.
Sorry, the end of the question was?
Can you give a sense of how you do the mixture between people, concept, technology?
Yeah, I was going to say it depends on how I feel on the day. A number of times,
By the way, for the people who are asking you for money, how do you feel today?
you have the formula, and then you have the reality, which does seem to change. Maybe it does because you wake up and feel bad or not. But I remember I've made all kinds of decisions. I thought that game is great, and we should invest in that team. It's the next hot thing, that location-based stuff. And we did it, way before Niantic took off. The game was great in Finland. nobody else liked it. Then the team didn't have any DNA for building what was next. And I thought, I didn't do the basics. I didn't ask the guys how they build games. They didn't know how. They just had one idea, and that's what they executed. So I thought, oh, well, that's a learning. I better not do that again. Then we invested in Supercell, where we thought, oh, the game actually sucks. And so that's when we thought, well, it's the team. So,
For a long time.
so yeah, they spent a long time pivoting around, and then okay, 3 hits. So they're obviously,
all right.
They're obviously better than average. So I think it kind of, it does sort of depend on the genre that you're building. It does, if it's technology, that's one thing. If it's pure content, that's another. But ultimately, I do say it comes down to the team. The team has to learn, the team has to iterate, the team has to know when to say, this is not working, we must kill it. We have to redeploy what's left on the right effort. And so I do agree.
Okay, and you have dodged the question of how you feel today, but that's for you to know and other people to try and discover.
I'll just say I was really happy that I made it all the way through GDC, every single meeting, and I didn't have a single battle royale pitch, and that made me feel like I really picked the people.
Turned down that turned out to be $500 or $600 million exits.
I was happy.
All right, Ed, we're going to ask what sectors people are investing, but since you're doing studios, are there genres that you're looking at in particular, or are there things that you're excluding?
Yeah, so for me, the whole idea of having a portfolio is to have a diverse portfolio. I mean, if you're sort of spreading risk out by making a bunch of investments, they shouldn't all be the same thing, right? It's not diverse. So I go into it very open-minded about where people are and what they're excited about and where they think is best to bring their product to market. I'm very open to that. I have my own biases, as I'm sure we all do, but I try to keep them to myself a little bit and stay open-minded in those meetings.
So one strategy that you and David share is you're discreet about certain things. But so you would be willing to take multiple mobile game bets, despite the issue that Charles brings up, which is one that most VCs consider.
I was very close to a mobile game company on the board. We sold to King at the right time, and through that I learned that is a very scary and difficult business, and we were happy we sold when we did. So that is certainly a bias of mine about that market, but you did all right in that market.
It is super tough, but look, we're continuing to invest in mobile game companies if they are doing something that's different. We don't want to see retread of whatever it is, but if they're going after new demographics, I think it's still fair to do genre mashups, but hyper casual continues to be super interesting. But you have to bring a different set of skills to the market. Games for girls that have a monetization strategy that's compatible with how women like to play. That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Stuff I don't like. I've never been a huge fan of VR, mainly because when I first looked at it, I was speaking to some guys some investors in the space, and they said we have a company policy not to invest in things that make people feel sick. And I thought, oh, it's back to basics. And then I went around China and I looked
Things you have
at
to put on your face. That's another.
Exactly. And I went around China and I looked at these installations and I thought and I thought this is kind of like the first time I ever drank beer. I thought it's kind of disgusting, but I want more. And so it kind of, I sort of realized it's too early. I think longer term, maybe there's something there, but we just felt the whole first wave was not going to work for the small budget kind of startups. And I think AR is in a pretty similar category. I don't think people are going to hold their hands out for more than 30 seconds, and I just don't think it's a viable mode. But I think it's indicative. So I don't think we're going to get surprised by technology shifts. I think things take a good 5 to 10 years to really simmer and then become a big opportunity. That was certainly true for mobile games. We all forget how long Apple shipped iPhones before they unlocked the device, and then the market eventually became big.
But David, you're investing, as a seed investor, you're investing farthest out. You're investing out at least 5 to 10 years. So if it's 5 years away, why shouldn't you be promoting people getting sick? I mean, excuse me, getting back into VR.
Yeah, it's a tight window because too far you starve to death. You don't have the cash to to go. Too short, you don't have the advantage. So we have to, we have to guess a little bit in what that zone is.
Right. Charles, you're investing in a number of new media. Are you willing to make? Which ones are you most inclined to make multiple investments in, or which you mentioned you've done mixed reality, you've done blockchain. Which are the ones that you're looking to do that you might be looking to do more in?
I think things that, if I look at most of the games investments we've made, with maybe one exception, they don't really look like games. They're these sort of entertainment experiences that have like game principles, and they're built by people who have real experience in games. I think we will do more in this sort of mixed reality blending of the real world and offline, just because I think there's a lot of interesting experiences to be built there. I agree with David. I don't think you're going to see people walking down the street doing this. At the same time, I wouldn't have expected to see groups of 30 people getting together in parks to play Pokemon Go. So like I reserve the right to.
I love the game.
Yeah, like right.
See me there, but
I reserve the right to change my mind. I just think the skill profile, the returns profile in mobile games in particular, so favors incumbents or people who have experience. It's hard for me to look at that category
Just
as
asking
a
you about
pre-seed investor.
which new categories are you?
So I really like voice-driven games. Like I'm an investor in one. There's another company that I really like that I'm not an investor in that's built like a really compelling voice-driven games. I just think they're fun and they're different.
Yeah.
And the kinds of experiences you can build in voice games they're just different. And I don't think people know yet what works well there. And I
like
think
Alexa.
things like that. Yep. And I just think people have all this free time when they're commuting, and these are entertainment experiences I think we haven't fully unlocked. So I think voice is a big one, the sort of mixed reality. We're going to do not very much VR. Based on what I've learned, it's just really hard to build really compelling. Even if you build games that can get to cash flow break even, that are good, solid businesses, building a breakout in VR still feels difficult.
Okay. Let's, David, you also mentioned that you were interested in spectating in terms of people looking at things.
Yeah, I mean, esports, crypto, boring. But I think, but there is a trend. What is that trend? What does that mean? So it's, look, I don't think there are going to be 100 esports games, but definitely there can be 100 or thousands of different things that millions and millions of people are viewing, and it is astounding to watch how much fun it is to watch. I mean, I remember when I was first at Electronic Arts, and the people were trying to do TV shows around games, and it was so boring. And it's amazing how then I stopped paying attention, and then 10, 15, 20 years later, it's half of it's half of the content on YouTube, and it's a huge audience. So business models around viewership, obviously influencers, all this kind of stuff. I think we're just getting started. And I don't call that esports. Some people might, but I think that's where there's a lot of interesting.
It's not esports. If you look at the generation that's between 8 and 25 years old, they spend in the West between 10 and 20% of their time consuming games is watching, not playing. This is a fundamental shift. Everybody in this room grew up with the games were meant to be interacted with. In China and in Korea, it may approach 30 to 40%, and that means that you're onto something which is, again, it's not about esports, which is about high-level competition. It's about what do we do when people are content to watch games, not necessarily passively, but more just seeing how it's played. I mean, you can do things like see how a game is played at a level that you could never aspire to. You can see how your friends play, so that's all sorted out.
At the same time, I think it's really easy to get excited about some shiny new piece of technology, but that's not really what making games is for most people. It's mostly, boring is probably an exaggeration, but it's hard work, and I sat through 3 great talks yesterday, Rob Pardo, Vincent Pella, and Owen Mahoney, and all of them were about, here's how we build teams. Here's how we manage teams. Here's how we review our teams. Here's how we run a product for 20 years. It's like blocking and tackling stuff that's really what teams live and die on. And that's why I come back to the people who know how to build these teams and how to run these. I mean, you're trying to combine entertainment, which is super hard, with making cutting-edge software, which is super hard, and that just requires great experienced management to do it well. And so, yeah, it's okay, here's some fancy new piece of technology we want to get excited about, but really, we should just look at making games is hard, and we should, I think, bet on people who can do that hard thing.
So let's turn this around. Let's turn around lens. We've been discussing what venture capitalists who have games experience look for in games. Now let's look at from the point about why game people should and should not take games. Charles, you and I had a discussion.
Should and should not.
Should and should not take venture capital. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I'm glad someone was listening to me. My apologies.
Not be confused.
But venture capital often drives you towards an exit, a sale, or an IPO. It drives it. So can you give some general observations about what works for venture-backed games play and what doesn't?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a little bit. I'd really, honestly, like to hear what David has to say. I think, when I started in games, it was really you have to go public or you have to get acquired. Those are the two paths. There weren't really as many secondary opportunities if a game was really ramping. And so I'm in a business where, in order to return money to my investors, I need IPOs and M&A and really, really cash flow positive businesses. Until recently, those weren't interesting to me because there wasn't a way for me to get out as a shareholder. I think that's changed quite a bit in the world of games and just in the capital markets in general across all sectors as an investor now. If you have a business that's doing well and it grows and it doesn't want to go public or sell, there are more ways than ever for me as an investor to sell those shares to someone else who's interested in holding it for the next period of time. That's new and that's great for games investors. I would say if your aspiration, though, is to build one game that might eventually get to what you consider to be a meaningful amount of revenue and the game is profitable and that's the terminal state of the game, I think you're going to have an uncomfortable series of conversations with your venture investors. That part of VC has not changed when it comes to game. So I think if you're going to take money beyond the seed stage, I think you have to really say, I'm basically signing up to build something that's really, really, really big. And I realize if I fail to do that, my investors are going to be disappointed and we might not be aligned.
And in other words, and you have to be prepared for always thinking about where's the path to sale.
That's right.
Okay. And you wanted to hear David's answer, which?
Yeah, it's that. The path to sale means something quite deep, which is that you're building something to sell. And if you're building something to keep and to hold, there are some technical exceptions around people who will kind of join for the long term. But that's not what we do because of the agreement we have with our investors. So we're definitely trying to screen out what we call lifestyle businesses that are good businesses and should be built and will make money and lots of people will be happy. But we can only make maybe 6 to 10 investments a year. We're trying to return the fund out of each one. And so that means we want you to build something that's going to scale relatively quickly, be valuable, and you're going to want to sell it probably to an existing big games company or media company. I don't wish anyone to go public. It's a horrible experience having been a CEO from one of those for a while. So that puts you on a track, and it's a little bit unfriendly. It's like you're having kids to sell. And if you're not really,
So the quote for Dean's article is, child traffickers or venture capitalists, they're the same, the same business.
oh dear.
Don't encourage him.
Oh dear.
We have 15 seconds left. How are you going to spend it?
So so I can't think of a better notion. No, but to understand,
Amber alert.
To understand what returning the fund means, you're looking at roughly a 40 or 50x return on the capital because you're making 6 to 10 investments per year. Just to understand how great a growth you have to be able to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, at least it will be worth $500 million in 5 years.
In 5 years. All right. I would like to thank Charles, Ed, and David for sharing their wisdom, and thank you all for coming.